What a trip. I recently spent 10 days in London at 3 different conferences, and this episode is about KubeCon, the final one, the biggest open source platform and infrastructure conference out there. I'm a cloud native ambassador, and I attend KubeCon as a media ticket, which means I get access to some unique parts of the conference, as you'll hear me talk about in this recap. And I'm excited for you to hear it because I think it's a good one. And I think it has lots of insider info and nerdy details. And if you were there, there's some stuff from behind the scenes we saw happen that I think is relevant as well in some of the media and analyst events. My co-host Nirmal Mehta joins me as we break down the trends in cloud native and cover what we saw and heard at KubeCon, including the state of AI on Kubernetes, the return of HAProxy, and this new AI gateway thing. Also, the growth and number of cloud native projects and what we think we should do about it, and more. Let's get into the show. Hi, I'm Bret. Welcome to the show. We're going to talk about KubeCon this week. I got my co-host Nirmal back finally after a break.
Imagine that. I just kind of randomly flew to London and I bumped into you on the street and we decided to make a podcast at this awesome conference. No, I'm Nirmal Mehta. I'm a principal specialist architect at AWS and containers tech lead. And these are my views and not of my employer.
Well, we're in London. This is KubeCon 2025 EU, KubeCon Cloud Native Con, otherwise just KubeCon. Yes, there's more than Kubernetes here, but we don't want to call it KubeCon, WasmCon, Serverless Con, Platform Engineering Con, Argo, GitOps Con.
Yes.
That would be a very long name.
Yeah, there's all those co-located events.
There's so many. I mean, there's more, I feel like than we need, honestly.
I think it reflects, and we'll probably get into this, I think it reflects the diversity of the workloads and what people are doing in the CNCF. And I think one that I was tracking was Backstage Con. Very popular. It's an open source CNCF project that provides a developer portal experience that a platform engineering team or any team that you need a portal for self-service. That was a good one. Argo.
Yeah, ArgoCon. So, I mean, that's basically like a tool-specific GitOps day. I always feel like it's weird that we've left out Flux. Like, why don't we just call it GitOps Con and then both tools can be discussed? But it's ArgoCon. We have now an AI day and a platform engineering day. So those are the two big ones. I should say, by the way, that this is the last day of KubeCon. We have both been here almost a week. I actually went to a Monkey Gras conference last week. Then we had rejects before KubeCon, then the day 0 conferences, and then the 3 days of KubeCon. So it has been a marathon event
of content.
And we have walked many miles because this place, like all of the conferences now for KubeCon, are huge.
Yes.
So we have 12.5 thousand people here this week, which again, I think is another record. And we're also an octave lower in our voices. And you might notice that. I might actually squeal a little bit like I just did because we have been talking nonstop for 14, 15-hour days every day. And so we're on the final day. So we have the whole week to talk about.
And of course, AI was just,
front and center.
Front and center. Usual. Not a surprise there, but I think the maturity is definitely a surprise.
Platform engineering and AI, I feel like, are really still the new things. Do you have thoughts on the platform engineering day?
I think platform engineering was definitely center again. And last time in Salt Lake City, we mentioned like that there's a new architecture SIG working group that are working on these reference architecture for how to use these, like which ones are the. And I hesitate to say winner because all these projects bring something to the table.
Right. They can't actually get to graduate unless they have a strong, they have to have user case studies. So there's definitely people using it in mass and multiple companies. It's very mature, but also maybe not for everyone.
Yeah. And I think I would say like where the center of gravity for that, like observability or GitOps, what tool has the center of gravity? And that was a continuation this time. In fact, I think one continuation of that is kind of like taking a step back and it's like, do we have too many? Like it's starting to, 400, when it was 200, it was already really hard to kind of keep track of what's going on. If it's 400 plus all the AI stuff, all those projects, do we need more projects in the CNCF? Is it like too many options, or is there some opportunity for maturing projects that exist and just kind of moving forward with that?
Yeah, the projects don't really get to pivot. I think that's one of the challenges is like once something's created and it's at least into the incubating status, it kind of still always has to be that thing. So if they think up a new idea that changes it significantly, you could always do a major version release, but you're probably, if it's that drastic a difference, you can no longer pivot like a company could pivot their product. You're going to have to make a new project. And something that was told to me is that just a few years ago, in terms of too many, there are archiving, essentially deprecating projects, or we call it archiving. There was just a few years ago, only 2 that we archived. Now we're up to 16 archived out of the, I'm going to say 400. That number is probably wrong, but it's way more than 200. We've got dozens of graduated projects, and those are the ones that pretty much at this point, it feels like everybody's using, or at least 50% of the people are using it. In some cases, there's 2 options for a thing like GitOps. And so you probably have like a 70-30 split or something there, but someone's using one of them, right? Everyone's using one of them. Things like Cert Manager, I think everyone's using Cert Manager.
Yeah,
it's like 100% saturation.
I would say that's probably the most consistent one in core DNS.
Yeah, and Kubernetes, of course. I mean, we're defaulting to Kubernetes here, but like ironically, we don't really have a second choice of orchestrator, which I would have thought 10 years in that we would have choice there.
Yeah, I mean, no, there isn't, but
right. Clearly we don't, because like there's no shortage of new projects. So clearly we don't have a desire for a new one yet. And so this problem, this is going to be a theme throughout the show, which is the platform engineering day is full because it's super hard. That's my take.
It's still hard, but organizations are still seeing value in creating them for the developers. Because we did mention that in Salt Lake City, that platform, in theory, Kubernetes is getting easier, right? Like for building out platforms is getting easier. I think the use cases and the workloads and what we're doing on that platform, AI, ML, data science, analytics, that is increasing. And then is therefore making the platform more complex again.
Right. It's another layer on top of that same platform stack. So like 5 years ago, your stack was probably not including anything AI. Now everyone's either doing that or planning. Not everyone, I should say. In fact, even the surveys I've done of engineers, just regular attendees like myself, essentially, at Salt Lake City, I could not find a person that was running LLMs themselves for their own company's purposes, even though for 3 years the keynotes have been nothing but AI. And if you're being told that AI is important, that you got to run it and you got to manage it, but people, a large portion of the people are not yet doing that, right?
Right. That being said, a advanced group of users are for sure using, like, running open source models and all that. And
it's not I don't think it's a majority yet.
No.
Like if I had to guess, and so if you think of the people at KubeCon, they're leading edge in IT in general, because when we think of the entire world of IT, I don't think Kubernetes has gained majority of the millions and millions of organizations, right? So then of those, only some of them send people here to learn the next gen tip of the spear stuff. And then of those, I was thinking in Salt Lake City, they're maybe using a SaaS, but they're not running open source models themselves or self-built models themselves. I started to see that shift because I was running into people that were indeed running their own GPUs and LLMs. I saw that more here.
But what I see on my day job, that's a global trend. And I think it's indicative of Kubernetes is the place that these folks are deciding to train and run inference.
Right.
Like that's the go-to. Right?
Okay.
So on that front, because of those types of workloads, we're now also realizing the persona of the community is potentially lagging the users of these Kubernetes platforms. And so most of the folks here are like probably platform operations, SRE, platform engineers, maybe some developers and VPs and leaders of their...
A lot more suits here.
Yeah.
I mean, not just because they dress nicer in Europe, but also a lot of executives.
Now, the folks that are creating machine learning models, doing data science, those are machine learning engineers and data scientists. And that group of folks aren't attending KubeCon.
Right.
And they don't know about GitOps and CI/CD and
infrastructure as code.
And maybe the internals of Kubernetes, nor maybe should they care. But there's now, like, because of the growth in the AI ML space and the project space and those workloads, that is now becoming more front and center of like the projects and what we're seeing a little bit more.
Yeah.
And making that user story, making that user experience better for a machine learning engineer or a data scientist to enable self-service on these platforms.
Yeah, I did hear an analyst in a private event talking about that we need to bring the AI, ML, the data scientists, all those people that are not aware of how we do things in cloud native and distributed computing, that we need to somehow bring them in. So they're almost like new users, right? New end users, and they're new archetype. I haven't run into those people yet, actually, at the conference, but I'm also probably not talking to them because I tend to be talking to container people or platform engineers. And so I'm not where those people are in the areas of KubeCon. Kubernetes is now 11 years old. KubeCon is 10 years old this year. And if you went back 7 years, maybe even 6 years, very engineer heavy, like very focused on engineers. I feel like we've now graduated, for better or for worse, into all the layers of everything from C-levels down to the junior developers who are being told that they have to deploy with containers and write YAML. And then now we're bringing in these science adjacent people that are trying to comprehend the obligation that they've been given to like use Kubernetes instead of the ways they used to do things.
Or might not even know that they're using Kubernetes, but they're trying to take what they're doing on their laptop or in their environment, like their lab and their data science environment, and just trying to scale it out as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it feels like we've got like 3 different conferences in one right now.
If I were to make a prediction, I would like to see that's the CNCF KubeCon community pivots a little bit more toward AI ML and those personas. It would not surprise me, but I suspect that will happen naturally, as this community also has to evolve to stay ahead of all these new ways of working.
Right.
And so probably indicative of the co-located event, the AI Day, grows so big that it's just a day at KubeCon, right?
Well, they have a track. They definitely had an AI track throughout.
Correct. But like, it might get to the level where like that's the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like there might be a place where that flips, where platform engineering is kind of like, like that's still going on. And then the workload specific kind of stuff is front and center.
It could go a different way, where just sort of AI becomes, because we casually say things like edge or IoT. I don't hear the IoT phrase as much anymore. I hear edge, but I guess maybe that's encompassed IoT. I'm not sure. But
yeah, it can.
But those are just part of the conversation now, as if like, of course, if you're a Walmart, if you're a Tesco, you've got all these problems, and it's just a part of your problem set. AI is new now, but I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years it was just a part of the conversation. It was assumed in the talk that you're running your own LLMs or something like that.
But the persona, that archetype, ideally we would see more of those folks start to come to this.
To attend,
and in order to appeal that crowd,
which means we're now 15,000, 20,000.
Yeah, and in order to make this relevant, we have to have sessions and stuff that's oriented toward that.
Talking about the archetypes here, this has been happening for years. And I can say this, even as an ambassador, I feel comfortable complaining on my own podcast. The keynotes are no longer for engineers. Like, we've been getting this way for a while. I think, especially in Europe, it might be different because it's Europe a little bit, but the keynotes don't feel like they're for engineers anymore. It feels very product pitchy, 15-minute slots, 7-minute slots of vendors. Like, I was just complaining that that in the third day keynote, out of the hour and a half or hour and 45 minutes or whatever it was, there was 5 minutes of it that was interesting to me as an engineer. And the rest of it felt like a show. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that we almost feel like we need 2 keynotes now. We need an engineering keynote and we need an executive keynote. Like, the keynotes now feel like briefings for the C-suite, to me. And that's fine, because I've been going, 20 years ago, I was going to Microsoft Tech Eds and then Ignites. And then I went to the Microsoft partner conferences. And so those had all that feel. And now we have that feel too. So we've grown up fully. This whole space has been fully like monetized by the ecosystem. I now actually look at the conference and I think I can tell by what's hot, by how many startups are in that space. You know what I mean? Like there are so many platform engineering vendors. There are so many now observability vendors and then security vendors. Like those are the three huge pillars. I think AI only startups they're there, but they're kind of being incorporated in everything.
Exactly. So the AI is a feature, like we talked about on Victor's podcast.
So everybody wants it. Everybody says it. Yeah.
Right. Definitely AI was in a lot of the vendor solutions.
Yeah. eBPF is taken backstage now, by the way. I don't see eBPF on the things anymore.
You made me just realize that was not front and center like it has been in KubeCons.
If I could talk directly to the CNCF management about the KubeCon conference, I've just realized that this week, even though we've been seeing it for years, is this conference has grown and grown and grown. But from my point of view, the project pavilion, and this is basically the CNCF open source projects, that area of the conference has shrunk in terms of the size of the overall conference.
Right.
It feels like a smaller portion because the vendor booths have grown. And then we have all these other cool things. We have games and all kinds of fun stuff to do. But the project pavilion, I feel like, should be twice the size it is today because it is the thing that fuels everything we're doing here. So why is it only 10% of the expo hall? So that's a wish for me. Like if I could magically make KubeCon better, it would be do more there rather than just these little stick post boost tiny things that can only fit like 2 people at. And let's figure out something else to do there because that's the fuel for the fire. And
I really liked the open telemetry.
That was a good idea. But it wasn't a CNCF thing. It was sponsored by Splunk.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, it was cool. So what there was here was for open telemetry, because there's so many projects and vendors and SIGs around open telemetry. Now that we've got a unified standard approach to it, is they had a sort of a generic learning area where it was
oriented toward
presentations. Like you had all these seats.
One thing that definitely showed up a lot more this year on the expo hall and in conversations is FinOps platforms. It's no surprise we're globally, economy-wise and different things. There's a lot of turmoil, uncertainty, cost optimization, squeezing the most value and performance out of compute, especially with these machine learning workloads. There was a bunch of FinOps startups to monitor and find opportunities for optimization. That's a signal, right?
Yeah.
It was there in, I would say, 2023. And then it kind of slowed down last year around optimization, but it seems like it's picking back up again.
The comment I heard in one of the analyst panels was they don't care about CPU costs anymore because GPUs are the leading indicator. and that everyone's in a race to optimize GPU workloads, and that the GPU utilization is less than advertised. Like everyone's like in a, I got my GPUs now, I'm going to hold on to them even though I don't need them because I'm scared if I let them go, I'm not going to get them back. So everybody's grabbing them and then maybe not fully utilizing them for the workloads because they knew they needed them before they could do anything. So that was it's kind of like you bought the data center, but now you need to find things to run on it.
Is it the great toilet paper run of 2020?
Right. That's right. Buy all the toilet paper. So buy all the GPUs, hoard them essentially. And so people were discussing what is the real GPU average utilization of GPU customers rather than, because what we hear in the news is like, everyone needs more GPUs, more GPUs, more GPUs. We assume that means they're already using all the ones they have. So
I think there's a distinction here that's important. One is utilization versus like having enough use cases or projects to run, or like prioritization, I guess you could say, right? And so I potentially agree with you. You know, at AWS and the customers we see, they definitely try to optimize as much as possible, and that's what we can provide, right? Like, and help our customers. So
that's a whole new layer, though. Like in terms of all the new projects and the new complexity on top of the existing platform engineering stack, is we don't just need to build LLM models and learn how to deploy them as resources, but there's all these certain management concerns. We talked about this on last year's podcast about KubeCon last year, but now the problem is not solved.
Correct.
And
GPU sharding, GPU as more of a first class citizen, as a resource in Kubernetes, GPU aware. What was it again? Scheduling.
Yeah, I heard about we need C groups for
C
GPUs,
groups.
right? We need to be able to-
And all the things that we're used to with memory and compute aren't there yet with GPU. Just observability of GPU utilization. It's a little bit trickier, right? There's the layer of the model and inference and what you're optimizing for. That's not just like the golden signals anymore, right? And you have to grab the NVIDIA metrics from those GPUs and see, and does that match the model version that you're doing inference on?
Which is why we see all those vendors. Like we see vendors promising to help solve that or help you manage that, right? Still talking about AI, you have way more insight into actual customers doing actual AI work in Kubernetes or not. And one of the things that I did get out of the final keynote was HAProxy is back in the game. I mean, they're arguing that they would never left.
I shouldn't laugh.
But they, I love HAProxy. I'm so glad to see them on stage. They've been around, I don't know, at least decades, I think. Them and NGINX have both been around a very long time. I was a huge fan. I was actually more of a fan early on of HAProxy than I was of NGINX. Not that I had any issues with it. I would use both of them, but I loved HAProxy for certain reasons. And I'm glad to see them on stage actually talking about what's the next big problem for proxies. And I think we're all kind of arriving at an AI gateway naming of this problem.
There's a couple different aspects of it. And taking a step back, and this is kind of related to the GPU utilization as well. I mean, at the end of the day,
they're all just HTTP requests, right? Like coming through a proxy or gRPC or whatever to something on the back end, but something needs to distribute load, right?
And
distribute load.
And HAProxy, Istio, and Tetrate also have an AI gateway. Solo was talking to us about the MCP side, but also relevant for AI in general.
Requests. Yeah.
But the networking story, the load balancing story, the proxying story, the authentication story around these specific type of streaming workloads or AI workloads is a very innovative and evolving space currently.
Yeah.
And there has been a demand for AI aware networking layers that are optimized for those type of workloads, essentially.
I'll be honest with you. As an engineer who's not yet running LLM inference in production or in any way, I think that's going to change for me this year. But
I'll help you, buddy.
When I first heard all this stuff, I thought it was bullshit. I thought it was all marketing ways to sell more things or the same things in a repackage. I have changed that opinion at this KubeCon to understand further the real problems. I think HAProxy did a good job on stage, but HAProxy framed it as requests coming in are essentially JSON that will be tokenized, and that each request could be a request that consumes the GPU for 2 minutes, or it could be a request that consumes the GPU for 2 seconds. The traditional load balancing doesn't apply here because they're all coming into the same route. So you can't divide the traffic by API call. Because I would always work with companies that the traditional example would be PDF report generation, right?
Yes.
It was always going to take way longer.
Task queue.
Yeah, I needed to queue it, and it was going to take way longer of a request. So I didn't want that to tie up, but it was always a different endpoint. So I could always route to a different load type and design that away from my page loading or what other post and get requests I needed.
Those are decoupled.
And in this sense, we don't know if they're going to have 1 million tokens or 5 tokens. And so they talked about we need to actually create proxy intelligence
at the network layer
so that it's actually analyzing the requests. The way they were describing it was like, we need an AI to analyze the request before it goes to the AI.
Right.
And we need to worry about authentication and permissions. We need to worry about load and whether or not that should go to a GPU without current load on it, which means the proxies have to have monitoring data so that they're load aware of the GPU they're about to send to. Like, all of this stuff sounds super hard to solve in milliseconds. And they're talking about, we need these things to come down to milliseconds, not seconds as they are today.
Yeah. And so I think one through thread there is that there is optimization opportunity at every step and every part of the infrastructure. Essentially, what we're saying is in normal web app, a network request or a network connection is fungible. It doesn't matter what CPU is going to, but now it does, like
Right.
potentially.
Right. We can't have dumb proxies anymore if we're going to do
and
AI.
then the storage layer too, which we've really barely even talked about on our show.
Yeah.
There's, storage, if you're doing training or RAG or all these other things, like storage matters.
Okay.
And access to storage and
Is
what
it both
data is.
Is it both speed of storage and size of storage, or is there like a primary?
Yeah. So exactly. So this is more on the training side, which is not the typical use case for most customers, right? Like it's probably Pareto 80-20 kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, training is the main point is to scale your model to train it against a corpus of larger amount of data. And so managing storage, the efficiency of that storage, getting that data to the GPU as fast as possible. That's an area of optimization. Then you actually get, and like we just mentioned, then you get to the actual GPU itself and optimizing, what it's doing, the algorithms. And we saw with DeepSeek that it's still greenfield, right? There's still a lot of space for optimization.
Right. We all assumed we were seeing the profile and it was going to be fairly consistent, and then suddenly
exactly. So I think that's part and parcel with respect to the GPU utilization, the actual GPU utilization numbers that person mentioned.
Right. I heard a funny statement in an analyst that big enterprises say we want to be more like Google, and his response was big enterprises can never catch up with Google, so stop trying, like stop making that a goal.
Are they still saying that?
From his point of view, yes. Even just DevOps is still a hard thing because their silos are so ingrained that they can't pivot. So they're just dealing with the current reality of trying to make Kubernetes work in their current org design without changing the org out.
So let's pick up on that topic just real briefly, because there were sessions this time, and I think it's been growing. Our friend Laura did one on the developer experience, and more broadly, the technology is easy, as much as we just said, platform and stuff is hard, but people are harder. And all the stuff that we see at KubeCon, all the cool technology, all the cool tools, open source communities, solving really complex technology challenges at scale, they have to be paired with an organizational change to be effective. And that is also a big component of KubeCon, is explaining how, if you're a VP of engineering or a leader or an architect, and you want to adopt a bunch of the stuff that you see on the session, you saw this awesome session, want to do GPU sharding, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I go back to my organization and, the network team is here. The story,
reality hits.
Right. And so we should not ignore that effective combining of the technology and the cultural changes that have to happen in an organization to support that is the way that this works.
Right. Kubernetes actually still works regardless of your organizational structure.
Correct.
It's pretty unopinionated in that regard.
Maybe, because the idea of a platform itself implies some kind of organizational structure.
Sure.
Right. And so that's another area of conversations I have with customers, and probably conversations that happen here. Do I have one cluster? Do I provision a cluster per internal customer?
Right.
Do I have a platform for each type of workload? And those have to be paired with an understanding of your organizational structure as well. Mm-hmm. And the developer experience, which is what Laura was talking about in her session, right? Finding what the productivity gains are from doing all this work.
Yeah, I'm assuming that your advice to customers on that is usually let's let the technology mold around your org instead of completely redesign your org. We can redesign the org as a separate conversation around efficiency and optimization of your workflows.
Yeah.
But we don't do that for a technology. Or at least we shouldn't have to.
Yeah.
We wrote the software. We should be able to write it.
The classic people challenge problem is it depends, right? And we'll leave it at that, because it really, truly, every organization is very different.
Yeah. So an interesting comment. Someone from Diagrid made a comment in one of the analyst events that what we really need to be doing is reducing the cognitive load on devs. And that's because that's a large complaint of the DevOps movement, was that we somehow accidentally saddled devs with more ops, which was never the intent of DevOps to begin with, but we did it anyway. Or maybe it could
be never the intent?
I don't think that was ever the intent. It was dev and ops to work together, not dev and ops give each other their jobs.
I think that might have been a natural consequence of increasing the collaboration and then also ownership, right?
Yeah.
So one thing about the whole entire container thing was throwing it over the fence. And so accountability and ownership, now you combine those teams, and the developers and the operators are responsible for keeping that thing up and running.
But we've had I hear you, but what's happened in a lot of cases is the management heard, I don't need ops as much. Because ops can be just as expensive as the devs. They're looking to cut costs. So why don't we automate ops so we can cut costs in the ops and make more devs, right? Which I always felt wrong, because I'm coming from the ops side, so I'm going to defend it, right? We have value. We do things the devs don't want to do. And DevOps was an attempt to make us hold hands and do things together, not hold hands so that one of us can get fired and the other one has the whole job. So the point that was made, which I thought was significant, was that platform engineering was yet another attempt at reducing the cognitive load on developers by providing the platform as a service, so that and then of course, because of Dapper, and I've not used Dapper in a project, but my understanding is it allows you to take the primitives that the developers might need and give it to them in a way that they can operate it from libraries in their language without having to be Kubernetes experts or infrastructure experts to use all that stuff.
With respect to data.
Okay, with respect to data. Yeah. And so the comment that we attempted that with platform engineering, and the fact that they use the word attempt means that we're maybe not quite there yet, because I think if I walk through platform engineering day and I bet I talk to people, I bet a lot of them are actually still developers. And they're saddled with this crazy responsibility of not just writing code for apps or being involved with the app teams, but they now actually have to build the platform to run it. And the platform is so complicated still itself, it still deserves dedicated ops and sysadmins in any significant scale of an organization. Do you see that? Is that what you see with your customers? I mean, you maybe talk to more enterprisey customers and less small biz and medium biz, but
I do understand where you're coming from, in that sense that operations teams seem to be, and I guess that, I mean, to a certain extent, this is the purpose of creating a platform, that the operations teams tend to have a large amount of leverage, right? So one operations person today has a scope of influence in terms of infrastructure, probably is 1,000x what a operations person was
20 years ago or
10 years ago, right? And that's true at a certain scale, at a certain size, right?
Sure. I mean, the larger you get, the more silos you have.
Right. Now, if we're talking about a really small place, then, the titles almost don't matter, because it's you're a dev, well, you're also operating it. Right. You're operator, well, you're also creating code.
Right. Okay, so coming from this could actually end up being its whole podcast separately, but 20 years ago when I was a Windows admin, there was a point at which you then needed to go buy the system management tools for your data center. You could have enough people to build a small data center that has hundreds of nodes, and you don't actually have central control of everything everywhere. And so there was a lot of hands-on stuff. There was a lot of scripting, but there was, at a certain point, you then have to go buy the tools. The problem I'm seeing with Kubernetes is that an organization of 10 developers and an organization of 1,000 developers, 80% of the stack still has to be the same between the two. They still both are going to need Argo, Kubernetes, Helm, Cert Manager. They're going to have to pick a CNI. They're going to have to pick a CSI. They're going to have to pick all these separate tools. The problems get more complex, obviously, as you grow up. But the platform still has dozens of tools potentially that you have to somehow know. And that is fine when you have the platform team and you can actually divide responsibilities in that platform team. But in the smaller organizations, they've lost those people that I talk to. It's not universal, it's not absolute, but a lot of those people they've lost the ops people they once had. And now the developers are saddled with more of this responsibility. And that's where I hear the complaints, gotcha. Right? Those are the people I hear. I want to leave Kubernetes for Swarm, or I want to leave it for functions as a service at a cloud or whatever. They don't appreciate Kubernetes because it's already too much work.
Yeah,
based on other job roles.
I guess it's just the wrong architecture for that. I mean, especially if you don't intend to grow at some point.
Right. Even if you outsource it to all the wonderful ways to run Kubernetes on AWS, you still have to know how to operate them at some point. You still have to understand the data and troubleshoot.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Obviously, a lot of the vendors, you just mentioned that there was a lot of platform vendors.
Mhm.
They're all taking a stab at trying to make it
Yeah.
more viable for the smaller organizations.
Easy button.
And
Yeah.
easy button. And I don't think we'll ever see that stop.
I did just hear from someone the other day that even on the Swarm side, they pay Mirantis for Docker Swarm support, and when they have issues, they just call them. Like they're their outsourced troubleshooting vendor, which a ton of these people do. That's why Red Hat's still Red Hat.
Yep.
And so I recognize that exists, but when we're talking purely about the open source, I'm going to blame a lot of executives for making the wrong call here. And like, you thought that the open source was free, and that but it's not. The code is free, the people are not, and you essentially saddled people with too much work. I mean, basically, I've seen people leave jobs because they were saddled with too much work.
Yeah.
One of the last things I'll say, talking about end of life for CNCF projects. We did hear in the keynote today, they showed a graph showing the rise of Sandbox, incubating, graduated, and now this little thin gray line at the top that's archive. We now have 16 there. But one of the things that was sort of agreed upon at an analyst event I was at, with a bunch of stakeholders at places like Google, Microsoft. I'm sure that there was other ones there, Mirantis, some of the enterprise players, Solo.io. These people were pointing out that a lot of these projects come in because a couple of people get a really great idea. They think they get excited about an idea, they develop a prototype, and they get it, and they do a little bit of maturity stuff to get it in the sandbox, right? So we have tons of stuff in the sandbox that maybe could just immediately go away. Like it may not ever see incubation,
right,
and higher up in the stack. But that more care needs to be taken when projects are created to think about their end of life. And I don't even know how we approach that, but it was an interesting conversation of that, right?
Yeah. And I think we already mentioned it, that's also paired with end user architecture group saying, okay, like let's make an opinionated selection of these tools.
Nobody creates a tool and goes, I'm going to think about when this tool goes away while I'm building it.
So I think there's a balance between supporting innovation and experimentation and trying new things and not becoming stale as we have new ideas and new technologies and new processes new mechanisms to, maybe someone comes up with a completely different way to schedule resources or something, like really, really like core fundamental parts of these platforms, or a new way to do observability, or an eBPF, doodad or some sort. Yeah. We don't want to stop that from happening in the community. We want to encourage that kind of experimentation. At the same time, understand that there are hundreds of thousands of people using these tools in production and in specific ways, and don't want to distracted by like these things that really are not like a viable path. But I think one thing you mentioned is that there was no way for these projects to pivot, right?
Right.
And so some of them are really big, and their scope starts to push the edge of the scope of the initial what it was made for, and maybe vertically integrates a little bit more awareness of higher up on the stack or lower on the stack. I don't think that projects need to pivot, but reevaluating what the scope of a certain project is, or splitting it up, or combining certain things together.
Yeah. Awesome. That's a great way to end it up.
Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.